I'm sitting here with Bernie Funston from Funston Guitars. I said that right, right?
That's exactly right.
So I've been playing guitar for years, like 21 years at this point. I know almost nothing about how you build guitars, which is part of why I thought it would be good to interview you. So I guess the first question that I have for you is, what's the part of the process that you get the most questions about?
That's a very good question. And don't be ashamed at not knowing much about guitar construction because musicians tend not to be really fluent with their instruments. Surprisingly so. They're very good with them, but they often don't know how they're constructed or even what the different parts are called. Um, Most people, when they contact me as a guitar maker, the first question is, why do you charge so much?
Okay.
They get used to, of course, going to places like Long and McQuaid, and they see a guitar for $200 or $300 made in China or wherever it's made, and they can't imagine why anything would be more expensive. And the reason it costs a lot is because I use extremely expensive materials, and they take me about 250 to 300 hours to build.
Okay, that was going to be one of my other questions is what's the construction timeline? Like how much
It's
goes into it?
it's a long time, and it depends entirely on the instrument. Some of my instruments I decorate with fairly complicated inlay.
Yeah, you were showing me one of the fretboards you do.
Right, you saw
So
the one
was that inlaid or painted?
that was inlaid. That was made out of that particular one out of maple burl and reconstituted stone and shell, power shell, and mother of pearl.
Oh, okay. Is that how you got the red tone to it?
Yeah, it's all well. The red tone came from a dye that I put on the maple, and then I scraped it away to get the yellows underneath to give the pattern of the dress.
Interesting.
Um,
I showed that to my girlfriend. She thought it was painted.
oh no, no, I actually a lot of people do think it's painted, but no, it's actually cut, and it's about an eighth of an inch thick, and it's inlaid into the fingerboard.
Fascinating.
And it's all cut with a jeweler saw and cut. I don't use CNC machines. A custom handmade guitar uh, should last you for your lifetime, and you should bond with it, and it should be very easy to play, very playable, and have excellent tone. And I sometimes tell them about Stradivarius, who
Yeah.
lived to be 94, and in his lifetime, they reckon he made about 1,100 instruments. So he was building them at a pretty high rate.
Pretty quick, right?
Um, but about 650 of those are still being played today.
Yeah.
And
How long ago was Stradivarius making instruments?
Oh,
That was 1700s, wasn't it?
yeah, I was going to say 17th century, but yeah, I think it was 1700s. That's a good question. I should know that. So the first one is usually price. That's usually the very first thing. And then playability would be the second question.
Yeah. Because I had one of your guitars in my hands and I could feel it just back. And I wonder, because I haven't held an instrument that does that. Is it about how thin the wood is? Like what goes into that? Like how do you get that kind of responsiveness out of it?
That's, again, an excellent question. And every guitar is somewhat different. That guitar you were playing was a classical guitar. And classical guitars, I always like a nice bass end, but they also have to have a very sharp treble register.
Because it's got to be bright enough.
Some guitars, like the flamenco that you saw with the woman on the fretboard,
Yeah.
it's constructed entirely differently, and they're not intended to have sustain or that big deep bass end. They're
Yeah.
played percussively, so they have to have kind of an explosive sound that doesn't kind of peter out or for a long time. And the guitars that I make for steel string guitarists, um, for those I usually ask the player what kind of sound they like. Some play a lot of slide guitar, and so I try to build with a structure that allows the strings each to have an individual sound rather than a muddy sound when played with a slide.
I'm almost curious, like how do you do this? Like is it the wood that you choose? Is it how it's cut? Like how do you bring that out of a guitar?
It's all of those. The wood that you choose is important. So for many flamenco guitars, for example, they're made from cypress, and that doesn't have a lot of sustain.
Yeah.
But they're also made from rosewood. So the way you construct a rosewood flamenco guitar is slightly different than you would a cypress one, at least the way I do it.
What kind of difference is that going to have to it?
It has a difference in the sustain. The rosewood has naturally more tonal brightness and sustain than the cypress wood, depending on how you've braced it. So what I do is I might thin the rosewood a bit, or I might thin the top in a way that makes it less bright and less responsive to a note.
Okay.
It gives a bit more punch.
Yeah.
I move things around quite a bit in guitars, so the bracing patterns that I use are
Yeah, that was going to be one of the things I asked
quite
about.
different.
So tell me more. Like, for many people, I'm sure, are unfamiliar with the bracing patterns. I barely hanging on. So the underside of the top of the guitar, you have different,
Wooden structures.
yeah, you've got wood kind of cut and attached to the top in different ways, and that does different things to the sound.
It does. It
So-
does, and it's first of all, the thickness of the top has a big bearing on its tone, but then the way you structure the braces has a lot of bearing on the stiffness of the top and the responsiveness of the top. And one of the great innovations in guitars was, in the 1830s, Martin Guitar came out with the X bracing, and they use that for a lot of steel string guitars. And there are certain tone bars that help you build up or break down different registers of notes. My classicals have, in many cases, fan bracing.
Okay.
They also have lattice bracing, and there's a newish, in the last 20, 30 years, bracing that's got a lot of curvature to it. It's called falcate bracing. And each of those choices I make, usually not with the musician. I don't say, what kind of bracing do you want? I ask them what kind of sound they're looking for. And then I try to take into account the wood as I'm working with it.
Yeah.
Once I've thinned it and I've tap toned the top a bit without bracing,
Okay.
I make some judgments about where I'm going to put the braces, how thick they're going to be, and that kind of thing. And of course, there's a structural side to bracing as well as the tonal side to it.
So it's more people are coming to you for your expertise.
Yeah, and it's a nice partnership, because as a guitar maker, I'm an enabler, and my ideas and my work is to enable someone who has a very different kind of talent, with music, for example, to create and produce this enjoyment that we get from music. And the idea is that I have to build something that they like to play, so that they bond with the instrument and they get the noise or the sound or the sonics out of it that they want. And so that's a pretty good partnership.
Absolutely.
But if we stray either way, if I try to be overbearing about the musicality of an instrument and they get overbearing about the structure or the design of it, often I find you don't come out with a good product.
Yeah. So it's that kind of give and take where it's like people staying in their lanes.
Yeah. And one of the best things for a maker is to sit down with a very gifted guitarist and have them play the instrument and then say, what don't you like about it?
Okay.
If they're playing it for an hour, you tend to think, okay, they're enjoying it. But the really important information comes from what they don't like.
Okay.
And some of them say, oh, the neck's too thick, or the neck's too stiff, or the top doesn't have a nice responsive mid-tone, or whatever.
Yeah. So can you think of a specific experience, like someone came in, they tried a guitar, and you got that kind of feedback on what didn't work? Like, how did it change the instrument construction?
I have one from certainly from an electric guitar point of view. I had a young guy that I had known for a long time. He played with a very popular band, and he wanted an electric guitar, and he wanted it to have a dark tone.
Yeah.
And I had done some research on different instruments, and I went back to an old wiring pattern that was done on the early Telecaster guitars.
Okay.
And so I produced a guitar with this dark tone for him, and I sent it off, and he called me up about a month later and said, I don't really think I want a dark tone. I would like a much brighter tone. I said, that's not a problem, because luckily most of this is done with electronics, so the structure of the guitar doesn't matter. So I swapped out the pickups And he went on to record with that guitar for many years.
Cool. So what was the change? Like, I'm curious about the wood construction. Did you use an alder or a mahogany or what?
On that particular guitar, I used a combination. I used a mahogany body with a rosewood plate
Okay.
inside.
So, like, you put a plate in the middle of the body?
I sandwiched it like a laminated body.
Okay.
And then for the top, I went with an inserted. It's I call it a faux pick guard. It looks like the pick guard on an electric guitar, but in fact, it was an inlay that was almost 5/8 of an inch thick. So it had a tonal effect on the guitar, and it was made out of bird's eye maple and set right into the top.
Did that give it more of a pop?
It did. It gave it more brightness, I think, and I used a particular neck construction to ensure that there was a really strong bond. Usually on most electric guitars, there are 3 or 4 screws that hold the
Yeah. So did you do a set neck then, or was it a neck through construction?
removal. But what it had was a very large brass fitting inside, hidden. You wouldn't see, that was a coupling joint,
Okay.
and it was my neck pocket was lined with ebony, and so it just made a very sort of tight guitar.
Okay. What did that do for the tone then, having the ebony and the brass introduced?
I think that really brightened it, because with a guitar, the whole instrument affects the tone, the neck. Some guys who have, let's say, an electric guitar, they get their neck swapped out and they say, it never really sounds the same as it did before. And the material of the neck makes a difference. On a classical Spanish cedar or Honduras mahogany, or if I was to use, maple or something like that, it would change the tone of the guitar.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I primarily I've got a neck through mahogany Flying V, like an electric guitar. So like very dark, aggressive sound. And then I play a flamenco guitar.
Okay.
So I have a Cordoba that I picked up used.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those, all of and the way they construct them, for example, some of the flamencos you would have played would have had a foot inside. If they were made in the kind of traditional style, there's a large piece that comes out of the bottom of the neck block that is kind of a foot that sits.
Oh, okay. And what does that do for it?
It affects the way the guitar, I guess, vibrates or resonates with the rest of the body. It probably makes a more secure joint.
Oh, okay.
I use a dovetail joint, and I don't have a foot. So for my guitars, my flamenco guitars, the neck block isn't firmly attached to the back like it would be on that kind of traditional foot construction.
Okay.
And that may have an effect on tone and sustain, but also it might have, I think, an effect on volume,
Oh, okay.
depending on how thick I've carved the back braces.
So is that going to bring more volume out of the instrument then, or?
I think it does. I think it does. In fact, I would say not entirely, but one of the comments that I had on many of my earlier classicals and flamencos was the volume. People said, "Gosh, these are really loud."
Okay.
And I'm thinking that's one of the factors, not the only factor, but the fact that I don't use a foot, I use a dovetail joint, and I've got this box that maybe reverberates a bit more.
Oh, okay. So what are some of the other things that are going into the construction to bring out that volume? Like, I hear a lot about double tops. I don't really understand a double top. I saw a guy show me a picture where it looks like a honeycomb inside the guitar.
Yeah.
A
double top for me is is a bit of a, I haven't bought into it entirely. The jury's still out. I know many people make double top classical guitars, for example, and they sound very nice. To me, it's almost going in reverse. You take a piece of master grade wood, spruce or mahogany, or not mahogany, sorry, a cedar, and you thin it to a point where it becomes unusable as a top. And then you glue it to a piece of Nomex, which is the kind of honeycomb material that it's I won't call it a plastic, but I'm not sure that would be the right word. It's like a plastic sheet, but you sandwich that between that and the soundboard, And the idea, I think, is that you get a more stable top because there's less wood and it's not expanding and contracting because the Nomex
Like,
tends to,
what's that?
makes it more rigid.
Okay.
And then you brace it accordingly to get the sound that you want.
Okay.
I don't mind doing that, and I can do that. I have done that, but I don't like to do that because I don't want to take a piece of wood and then, sort of thin it to a point where it's unusable
Yeah.
by itself. Um, Also takes some of the fun out of it. There are woods that I've used for classical tops that don't have as much variability because of humidity. One is Paulownia, which is a very, very soft wood that is structurally surprisingly strong, um, and it doesn't absorb water, so you don't tend to have the issues with humidity. Uh, an entirely wooden guitar under different conditions of humidity will have potentially very different sounds.
Okay.
And I'm not sure why they started making double tops. I would think it was probably for stability.
Okay, stability more so than the volume, because when I hear the double tops, they're very loud.
Okay.
So I guess bringing it back, like what do you do to your guitars to make them loud? Like what kind of things? Are these trade secrets? Can you share them?
Well, they're not trade secrets. They're trade instincts.
Okay.
Um, and I say that without being too cute about it, but
Mhm.
I have a process that I learned from Sergey DeYoung.
Yeah.
And then I've modified it over the last 25 years. And there are things I do differently than Sergey, which made more sense to me in the circumstances, maybe because of the tools I had or because of what I was trying to do with the final result. And sometimes it's just an instinct. So, and I've noticed this with my shopmate Ruben, we'll be putting a soundboard together, and some people use a lot of scientific equipment and they tap it and they get the frequencies and how many hertz is it here and how many hertz is it there. And we don't do that. We tend to kind of tap it and bang on it a little bit and we listen to it and then we kind of get an instinct. And sometimes just by looking, you say, that brace needs to be a little higher, or that brace needs to be a little shorter, or a little thinner, and so it's an instinct, and it's an art form, but I think it's an accumulation of years and years and years of using different woods and understanding how they respond, and then just having an instinct that if I do it this way, I think it might be better.
Okay.
And so, as I said, people told me my guitars were loud without me ever trying to set out to make a loud guitar.
Interesting.
So if I keep doing what I'm doing,
They continue to be loud.
continue to be loud.
Do you have a preference on how the top's constructed? So someone comes to you for a classical guitar. What are you going to make it with? Do you have a default mode or do you have a couple questions that you're going to ask someone? Like what do you think is the most important choice you're making at that point?
Probably the first fundamental choice is the wood. Some people were classical players and they know their music. They like the warmness, let's say, of a cedar top.
Okay.
So the choice of top
Yeah.
is one of the first things. The second would be, of course, whether they want and you try to make a balanced instrument in any case, but whether they want maybe more bass or whether they want, more emphasis on the treble.
Oh.
That might be a factor. In terms of the bracing, I've had success with both lattice tops, well, certainly lattice tops and fan fret. I don't mind using the traditional builds, but again, I tend to adjust them as I'm building them.
Okay. So for someone who might be unfamiliar with this, like why lattice, why fan? Like what would you be adjusting? Because I'm guessing you would be moving the little pieces of wood around inside the body.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's say someone comes to me and they want a very responsive top and they're willing to try something like Paulownia, which is very light and therefore, the energy of the strings, you can make it loud, you can make it bright, you can do all that kind of stuff. And it has some of the properties of a double top in that it doesn't absorb water, so it's not humidity sensitive in the way that, let's say, a cedar or a spruce might be. Because of the way Paulownia grows and the speed that it grows, it's a very, very fast-growing wood, and some of the grain lines are not. We laugh when we make these as guitarists because in an inch you often say, well, 18 to 25 growth lines in an inch is a very nice tight top.
Oh, okay.
And with Paulownia, you would have 0 because the growth in 1 year might be 2 full inches.
Wow.
So I reversed the way I build with Paulownia, but because it tends to be softer on the grain lines than it is in its pith, I tend to like to use a lattice bracing
Okay.
just because I feel more secure of having support everywhere that I think I need support.
So what is a Paulownia tree?
It's a tree that I think
Like, where do they grow?
originated in Asia.
Okay.
They're growing them now in Latin America. I made for the President Jimmy Carter Legacy Collection. It was a collection. It was supposed to be 12 instruments. I think it ended up being 9. I made the 2 mandolins for that collection.
So you're making instruments for Jimmy Carter?
It was the company that sponsored it knew that Jimmy Carter grew Paulownia trees. He was an early adopter for sustainability.
Okay, gotcha. I was going to say, like, the timing of that wasn't adding up in my head.
Well, this is the interesting thing about this story is that Jimmy Carter was an early adopter of Paulownia because in Georgia, Plains, Georgia, where he lives, they could grow in that environment. And I think there are a couple of Paulownia trees in Victoria, actually. I haven't seen them, but I've been told about them.
Okay.
Anyway, he started growing these trees about 25, maybe 30 years ago. I think at least 25. Well, they grow to maturity in about 10 or 11 years.
Okay, so they come up quick.
They come up very quickly. And so he had this wood. And so this company got the wood from his properties and they built these instruments to celebrate his 96th birthday.
Wow.
So the 2 mandolins that I made were made from Paulownia. They were flown down to Nashville and they were played by a very accomplished mandolin player, Sierra Hull. And the collection was named after Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, and they were sold at auction in the U.S., and the proceeds went to some charities that were named by Jimmy Carter.
Cool.
So all of that was done for his 96th birthday. But those trees or those kinds of constructions, as they say, some of them need to be a little bit experimental. I had never worked with Paulownia until I made these mandolins.
Oh, interesting.
But then I realized that they would be very good for classical tops.
Okay, so that's kind of how you got into
by
that.
building a little bit. I probably wouldn't be as comfortable with a fan bracing in a Paulownia guitar. But again, a lot of these things are experimental,
Okay.
and people make great sounding guitars in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, I see you've got a lot of different wood in the background.
I do.
What's a project you've got on the go right now?
The next one up, I'm just doing the finishing on these 2 classical guitars that you would have seen at the Northwest Guitar Festival. And then I'm starting to build this. It's a ceremonial guitar for an indigenous group in the Northwest Territories. It's made from 55 million year old redwood.
Whoa.
And that is going to be quite an interesting build. And that may come as close to a double top as I've done for the last few years, because I think this is very, very ancient wood, obviously. And for stability, I want it to have something other than just itself. So I'm using it for the soundboard. And I've got a couple of other instruments that I've got on the drawing board. I don't know when I'll get to them, probably the fall.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Do you ever think about the character that the instrument's going to have as you're building it, like the personality that will come out from the instrument?
Or I do, and in fact, it presents itself almost from the time you cut the wood. Some guitars want to be built.
Okay.
Other guitars fight you every step of the way. they either present something unusual when you sand them down to their final thickness, you know, a sap pocket or something materializes just where you don't want it. I've had actually the very first classical guitar I built, I would say wanted to be built. And the reason I say that is that when you're building, you tend to build a sound box and then you fit the neck to it. If you're using a dovetail joint like I do, it would be a different form of construction if you're doing it traditionally with a foot. But it takes a while to get the alignment of the neck. The neck has to be centered properly on the body, and then it has to be canted at a certain number of degrees, or about degree and a half, so that it presents the strings at the right height at the bridge or at the saddle.
Gotcha.
And that takes a lot of finicky work because you have to get these joints resolved on 3D plane. So there's lots of fine sanding and fine maneuvering to get it straight. And I remember Sergey telling me about how you had to do this, and I was going to work through this process. And I got the neck ready to put on the body, and I put it on, and it looked pretty good.
Okay.
So I went to him and I said, I'm not really sure where I should be, you know, sanding or how I should be fiddling this to make it fit perfectly, because it looks kind of good. And he said something along the lines of, I've been building guitars for 50 years. I've never had one fit first time. And he put on the neck and he went, I said, oh my God, glue it up. And it was beginner's luck, but that guitar wanted to be built. Others that I followed exactly the same process, something goes wrong every step of the way. Either you put the glue in and you come back the next day and it's moved, or you know, you have to undo something. And there's an old adage that a good guitar maker makes mistakes, a great guitar maker fixes them. And one of the things, because of the long process, you know, 300 hours, you want to be able to figure out how to fix a mistake without having to abandon the instrument.
Okay.
And there are all sorts of them. You know, you gouge the soundboard, or tool drops on it, or something.
Oh yeah. What's something where you've had to abandon the instrument where you're kind of like, oh,
It's funny. There's one right over there on the stand.
okay, what happened to that one?
This is an interesting instrument, and I'm very keen to see if I can finally fix it.
Okay.
This is a guitar
I love the wood.
made out of Papua New Guinea walnut. It's got a side sound port, and the top is redwood. It's actually old growth redwood.
Wow.
The rosette is spalted maple, and the neck on this one is that's Spanish cedar. Anyway, this guitar is about 60% done, and it was sitting on the workbench, and I was about to get it ready. I have lots of finishing and other things to do on it, and I picked it up here, and I put my thumb through the top. The sanding of this had thinned the wood, because redwood is very
Fragile.
it's fragile. It sands quickly, and I hadn't been paying attention, and I thinned it too much here, and I put my thumb through it. And now this is the most difficult place to reach, because you can't reach it through the sound hole with my size of arms, and I haven't found anyone whose arm will reach back there. So I have to make a device to shore this up, put a reinforcement in here, and then probably do some remedial work on the top.
So a very difficult fix.
It's a difficult fix. It would be a shop guitar, so people can play it just to hear what it sounds like with a sound port and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, that one was a mistake. That it's the only one I've had that I couldn't fix.
Wow.
This was done 2022.
Okay.
So
I mean, you've been making guitars for quite a while at this point. My math is correct. So
yes,
so to have that be your only mistake, that's pretty impressive.
it's the only one that's been irrecoverable. So that one I just pulled it out this week, actually, and I thought
I can hold on to it for you here.
Yeah.
Well, you got the other one there. Because what's going on with this top that you have there?
This is a guitar top. This is the one I was.
Yeah. Tell me about what you got there.
This is made by a very big manufacturer in the US, and it's really kind of garbage. Uh, the bridge plate is just it floating in the middle of nowhere. When I normally certain brace ends need to be tucked into the binding of the guitar.
So this is what a store-bought guitar looks like.
This is what it looks like. And these sticks are unshaped. They're just glued on.
How much would this guitar have gone for, before you removed the top from the body?
This was probably in 1970 about a $500 guitar. So it was considered not a overly expensive, but $500 back then.
Yeah, we're looking at what? With inflation, probably $1,500 now?
At least.
Yeah.
At least. By comparison, I bought my Yamaha classical guitar in 1969 for $70.
Okay.
And it's a great sounding classical guitar. I still have it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, my first classical guitar was a Yamaha as well. Solid top.
yeah, and
They hold up.
if I had gotten a really expensive one, it would have been $150 or $250.
Okay.
So this would have been considered like in that, probably in that range.
Okay.
Yeah,
Pretty upper end at that point.
but garbage in its construction. These are completely unshaped. These are little sticks that were in a jar somewhere, and they're not particularly carefully.
Do you have the top to one of your guitars to show a comparison?
I don't, unfortunately. I have photographs, but I don't have. And I should say too, when people come and ask, "Well, how do your guitars sound?" "Oh, it sounds okay. It sounds a little tight or whatever." It's worth mentioning that guitars love to be played, and they really do open up over time. The more they're played, the better they should sound.
Yeah.
A Luthier built guitar on day one will sound much different than it will 5 years from now.
Interesting.
So, for example, you played a classical where you felt that bass. You
That
said
reverberation, yeah.
I had one that was at that show that had just come off the bench the previous day. It had never been played before. The first time it was played was at that show.
Okay.
It sounded much tighter than most people would want. But the guitar that reverberated, that had been played for 5 years. And I think the one that was tight on day one is gonna end up in the same place because I used almost an identical approach to building it
Interesting.
in terms of its thickness of the soundboard, the bracing system, and all the rest of it.
Now, when you say the soundboard, are you talking about the fingerboard or are you talking about the
soundboard,
top?
I'm talking about the top.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So just how everything kind of
Yes.
in between there.
It just and the more you play it, the more it's sort of the tones start to work together.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't get over this redwood. I've never seen a guitar top built out of redwood.
Yeah, it's a
That's
nice wood.
beautiful.
It's a very nice wood for tops. It's tricky though, as I say, you have to be very aware that this is a tree that has hydraulics to lift water from the earth hundreds of feet in the
So like how water interacts with a tree impacts how you build it.
Well, no, but it impacts what kind of glue you use. I don't think I would ever use cyanoacrylate super glue with redwood again.
Okay.
Because unless I'm 100% sure that I've got my end grain sealed, because there's such a danger that a drop of glue here can wick into the soundboard, and then you've got a problem. It doesn't change the tone necessarily; it changes the cosmetics.
Gotcha. Now I've got a question for you here. What's a hill that you'll die on in terms of construction? What's a hot take? Like what's something where you're like, ooh, I don't know how popular this is, but this is something that I will just stand my ground on.
Okay. Well, one of them is something I've already mentioned, and that is not to let the customer get involved in the design beyond cosmetic stuff. I often ask people, well, if you'd like some inlay, do you want your name at the 12th fret, or do you want a particular thing
Okay.
design on a guitar, and I can build that into the rosette, or I can do it on the fretboard or do whatever. There's some latitude with that. And I allow them to give me some guidance on how thick a neck they want, and what kind of scale length they want if they've been playing for a while.
Okay.
but I don't get into bracing or doing anything like that with them. I because of the structural issues, and it's kind of a when you're building custom guitars, there's a fine line between being fully customs, where a customer walks in and says, "I want this, 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 and this." Yes, I'll do it all. Uh, Really, these have to be in a way my guitars, so I can guarantee the integrity of the build.
Okay.
And hopefully the sound that they'll like. Um, but personalized enough that the customer, when they pick it up, they feel a connection with it.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I've done quite a bit of inlay work over the years. Everything from indigenous chiefs that have, what looks like a beaded fingerboard.
Oh.
It's actually
Okay.
stone, but it's inlaid, to um, a cosmetic surgeon who wanted a particular kind of guitar, electric guitar, but all he wanted on it was a beautiful woman somewhere.
Okay.
And so there she is sitting between the volume and the tone knob
Okay. So on the electric guitar.
on the electric guitar.
Cool.
But I've done quite a few interesting inlay patterns.
Do you have a favorite that you've done?
I think that one for the plastic surgeon was one of my nicest ones.
Yeah.
Certainly the one that I did for the Alaskan indigenous chief was a nice piece. I like the flamenco ones. Those were done by just on my own ticket. Those were done for the Souk Fine Art Show, and there's a male counterpart to the female.
Oh, okay. So you've got a pair of guitars then.
Yes, and one's a Blanca, so a blonde, made of cypress, and it's got the male dancer, and that one that you saw was a Negra flamenco, and it has the female dancer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a good project. This one that I'm building out of the 55-million-year-old redwood, it's going to have a very elaborate inlay, sort of suite of ideas. It's probably going to end up back in Yellowknife and dedicated to the Pleacho people who lived in the area where the diamond mine was located, where this wood was taken from. And the sound hole will have a herd of caribou migrating out of it down the fretboard, because they were people that were very dependent on caribou. And it's going to go back there. And the wood of that guitar will probably be birch. That's some flame birch I hope to use. And I'll use mammoth ivory for a fair bit of the inlay. So the idea behind that one, I think, hopefully the result will be spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
But
how can people find you? We're going to do a shameless plug. People have been listening to you for a while. Where do they go to find your guitars?
They can find me online. I have a website. I actually have two websites. One is Funston Guitars, and that shows a range of instruments that I've made in all the categories. It's not up to date. I hope to get it there soon. The second is Instagram. I don't post that often. I often try to get the discipline of filming while I'm building, and I almost never get there. I get lost in thought, and I don't want to turn on a camera, and I could have one running in the background, but I tend to kind of move around a lot. The third way is at guitar shows, and we've got a big guitar show, well, hopefully a big guitar show coming up in June or this year here at the Mary Winspear.
Okay, so in Sydney.
In Sydney, it's the Victoria Guitar Show, and Ruben and I are organizing that. We've got about 30 luthiers.
And you said that's in June?
It's in June, 20th of June, and it's right around the time of the Seaside Music Festival, which is the same weekend. So hopefully there'll be a fair number of musicians around and spectators. But yeah, that's probably the quickest way to find me. I don't go out and advertise much, and it just takes too much time. I spend my time building guitars.
Yep, there you go.
So
Well, thanks so much for coming on here.
Thank you very much
Thanks for having me at the shop.
Well, there you go. And
Yeah.
any other questions, just fire away, because there's lots to see and do here. We're not a walk-in shop, but if people want to come and visit, we'll make sure and accommodate.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. That'd be really cool.
Okay.
Right on.
Thanks.
Thank you.